Well, all right, Rick. Thanks for coming all this way. Well, really not too far.
No, not too far.
What, about a
30-minute drive.
30-minute drive?
Yeah, 45.
Yeah. And I appreciated, you sent me your paintings, and you've really done a whole series. You sent me a whole bunch of them to look at.
Yeah.
And then I just asked you to bring, and you brought 4 of them, and I picked my favorite 3. My favorite's the one that the last one we're gonna show.
Okay.
But before we get started, give me a little story about how you got started with art, because you were telling me that you worked with David LaFell for a while and some other.
Yeah. When I decided I wanted to try art, it's probably 23 years ago, and I started in watercolor. Mm-hmm. And my watercolors started getting so thick they were looking like oil paintings. So I decided I would switch to oils, and it took me a while to get used to that medium. Mm-hmm. But I had some excellent mentors. David LaFell was one of them. There was a art school over in Fredericksburg, and they would bring in artists from around the world.
Yeah, right here in Texas.
Right here in Texas, and I would attend those. It was a week-long artist school, and I had several good mentors, and that really helped. That's how I got started in the oil painting.
So, first of all, you work only from life, is that right?
That's correct. Yeah.
You've never worked from a photo.
No.
Yeah, and so where do you set these things up? Have you got?
I have a shadow box in my studio.
So, well, when you so you're working wet and wet mostly?
Yeah.
And so when you start to lay in your colors, are you sort of blocking it in, or do you just kind of building it as you go?
No, I just block it in. I just this is where this is going to be. This is where this is going to be. This is where this is going to be. Then I start putting in some background.
Right.
And then I start painting some of the lightest areas and some of the darkest areas.
Right. Well, one of the things, in terms of me being trying to give you some criticism, I think that a lot of it is, first of all, I don't have the source to look at, of course.
Right.
So that would make a lot of difference. I could say, well, do you see the little dark bits in there that you missed, or whatever it is? But so a lot of this is going to be, what can I say? It's a little bit of a hunch, when I say, well, it looks as if this or that or whatever. But I would say that there's maybe a little bit of exaggeration of color in terms of some of the colors are more intense than they would be in nature. Mm-hmm. Like, for instance, if you take a flower here, that's just pop pink, and then there's some really strong, and that's these are wonderful dirty colors. I love the greens and everything else.
Right.
But some of these, like just a little bits of blue and might be, and the orange here, might be a little more vivid than it is in real life. And so maybe milky color is not always a bad thing. Like, in other words, there's no milk in this.
No.
That's like burnt umber and yellow and red, you know what I mean? And so, but a little bit of blue and a little bit of white, which is,
would calm it down just a bit.
Exactly.
Right.
And
that's one of the things that I've noticed about my paintings as they've evolved. This painting was done several years ago, I guess. I don't remember. But I remember thinking, this is really pop here. I want to get something to pop down here to offset that. But
a lot of people, a lot of artists, they vivid up their colors here and there, and that's something that is absolutely a matter of taste. I mean, when I say that I prefer natural color, that's just. But in terms of realism, if somebody, I've said this before, but if I had a art school, all my first year students would not be allowed to make their colors vivid, because I would say, hey, let's find out what natural color is first, and then you can go but you've got a lot of experience, so at this point you should do whatever you want to do.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But no, I think your values are actually pretty good. I think my guess is that this reflection is probably a little more pronounced than it is in real life.
Yeah.
And that's but I love the subtlety of whatever's going on in here, and the way you did this, the abstractness of it, the subtlety of the shadow and the way the play there. So there's a lot of things that you're doing right, and I love this color down here. But anyway, we don't need to talk any more about it, but it's a nice little still life.
Thank you.
And we'll get on to the next one. All right, well, this one here, is another still life. Do you paint mostly still life?
Mostly still life.
Yeah.
Mostly
And
I've done some landscapes, and but I like the still lifes. First of all, I don't like to paint outside.
yeah, right. Well, if you paint from life, you tend to paint still lifes, or you have somebody that'll model for you for free.
Right.
Anyway, so these are, this is, you already know what I'm going to say about those bright oranges. And they're bright. Yeah, so that's something that I don't want to, gripe on too much. I think, and the thing about, have you ever painted oranges? One of the things, the color can be as bright as this right up around the shine. But as things go into shadow and all these grays start reflecting into them, that's when the color really gets toned down a lot. And so anyway,
absolutely.
So in other words, oranges, that anything, the essence of the color, like whether it's skin tone or whatever else, is right where the light's hitting it.
Right.
Your brain says the color of your skin is up there where it's being well lit, not the reflection, but right around, you know what I mean? Right where it's well lit.
Right.
But then our brains fill in and take all the shadow and take. So in other words, it's not nearly that intense, especially in the shadows.
Right.
So and one of the things about in terms of painting more natural color, is that if you have the dirty colors in the shadow of the orange, or the color may be real intense, but when you have all those dirty shadow areas, right, it makes the orange, which is intense, prettier. You know what I'm saying? In other words, when these are more dirty, then this color becomes more yummy or whatever. So, all right, well, let's take a look at the next one.
Okay.
All right, well, this one's my favorite of the three. I really like this one.
Well, this is the most recent one.
Really?
And as you can see, I've toned down the orange a little bit.
Yeah, no, those are wonderful dirty colors in there. I mean, if you look at that color in isolation, that's really not a strong color at all.
No.
But it sure makes the yellows prettier.
Right.
Yeah, so that's good. And I like the way you did the reflection. The background is nice. It has a certain quality that's where you can see the light, that sort of David LaFell, effect that he's such a master of.
Right.
But I think that, what's really important, and the reason that I think this works, is because of all this shadow in here. Right? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I mean, that's where you've got to have somewhere to build
You have
to.
a little mystery coming out of here, what's coming out of the shadow.
So is this one in your own house, or?
This is my own house. This one was the one my wife suggested I bring.
Okay.
So she was right.
Yeah. On your penciling and your drawing, are you just doing dead reckoning, or?
Yeah, I don't draw with pencil. I just go at it with a brush.
Yeah.
And just fill it in.
Kind of just start filling in.
Yeah, and then with my background, I can come back in and carve around it.
Yeah, right.
But I find that if I pencil it in, I get too tight. I won't make the edges soft enough, so I don't do that. So.
Yeah, when I paint for myself, I don't. When I do my demos and I'm teaching, I do it. But when I'm just painting a still life, I just use my brush. Yeah. It's almost easier to kind of block in and kind of see what you're doing.
Well, it is for me. I paint fast. This is probably less than 2 hour painting.
Oh, is that right?
Yeah.
Wow. Well, that makes it fun, doesn't it?
It does make it fun, because I have some artist friends who will spend up to a month on a painting.
Yeah.
And I ask them, I mean, they're very successful artists, and they get a lot of money for their paintings, but you can count every thread.
Yeah, right.
And I'm just not that kind of a personality.
Yeah, well, I don't think, I mean, if I was to paint something like that, I'm not at 2 hours. I'd probably be about 6 hours, 6 to 8 hours, depending on how much I wanted to put into it. But that's
well, you're a much better painter.
No, but 2 hours is no. But I think that's. I mean, it's not a contest of speed. But what I mean is that there's no reason. I think that a lot of one of the things that people make a lot of assumptions, I think, about the way that some of the old artists worked. And those old guys, they would put in a lot of work. You know, they would spend it wasn't necessarily sitting there laboring over it, you know, in this sort of like that kind of way. It was more like repainting things or working with a live model, and they had to deal with the time of day issue, and the model didn't show up, and I, you know, I don't like this is how this is going, so I'm going to redo this half. You know, it was that kind of struggle, not the sort of like,
It's not the brushstroke struggle.
Yeah, right.
Because to me, if I get the brushstroke down, and if I want to go back and do something, I ruin that particular brushstroke, and I may really like that brushstroke. I think.
Yeah, right.
You see it, I think, in this pot. Some of the brushstrokes that, if I had blended, would have lost all of that.
Yeah, you got to have some texture, no matter what it is. You got to have it. Yeah, and you've kept that everywhere. I think that, you know, the way that I learned to paint fast was not for any reason other than just meeting deadlines. You know, where I would. I mean, I don't know that anything would have ever pushed me to learn to paint. You know, with a strong stroke, except that I literally would have to finish a background of a painting, and I knew the client was going to be there in the morning, and I just only had so many hours to paint it, and I just realized, you know what, I got to break this down to the essence and stop overthinking this. And but it was good to have that training in the beginning, right? I mean, did you start kind of more tight when you were starting out?
Yeah, because I had done a lot of watercolor, and then so when I switched to this, it got pretty tight. And I really had to fight to make it loose or to keep it textured.
Right.
I think that's hard for most people. They want to paint tight because that's what they see.
That's right. That's right.
Yeah. You know, but one thing painting has done, it's allowed me to see. You know, when I first started painting, I thought I could see around corners. It was such an awakening. You saw more colors, more detail. It was just, I think that's a wonderful thing about art.
Oh yeah, you start noticing what shadow colors are, and that things aren't what you've always thought they were. Yeah. What was your connection? How did you end up running into David LaFell? What was the?
Actually, he came to teach a workshop the first time at the Fredericksburg Art School.
And because when you came in, you were talking about, I was telling you that he was a big influence on me with my still life compositions and lighting and everything else. Was back when I first started painting, I'd been painting maybe a couple of years, and somebody gave me a book with a lot of his still lifes in it, and I had never seen, I think at that time I really thought that those were about the prettiest still lifes I'd ever seen. It's a huge influence on kind of how I thought about lighting and everything.
Yeah, and if you can see them directly in a gallery.
Oh, I can imagine.
It's like looking at you just want to sit down and look at it.
Yeah, right.
You know, just re-feel the brushwork.
No, I think that's what, I didn't really think much about still lifes until I started looking at his work and realized, wow, this really is something different. You know what I mean? It wasn't just grapes and and whatever,
Whatever he had.
Yeah, well, what you see in a lot of museums, people were kind of doing a certain style, and you'd see that style and everybody would repeat it and everything, and then he kind of was taking that, it's just sort of the best of everything, in my opinion. It was dark.
I think what they call it abstract realism.
Yeah.
Which is, it's not photorealistic, but it's realistic.
Yeah.
And it's...
Yeah.
But what changed you you kind of changed styles now here a little bit?
Well, if you look at my paintings, by the time my second year, I can show you a couple of my early paintings, but I was painting with a real strong stroke to start with. And I wasn't as skilled, but by my second year, I was just slapping it down and doing some nice paintings. And then what happened was I didn't realize this whole thing about texture and painting ugly and all the things I talk about. So what I'd do is I'd paint, and then it would be like I'd paint the hair, and all I could see was the brushwork, right? And I'd say, wait, if I take a blendy brush and go whoop, 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 whoop 3 times, I like it more all of a sudden. because it happens so quick that you don't have time to get the artist curse on what you've just done. You know what I mean? In other words, you paint and you just kind of soften everything up, and you as the artist like it better, even though you're turning it to blendy, smooth, you know. And so, but I actually didn't even realize that I was doing that, and was painting portraits for about 1.5 years or 2 years. And then I've told this story before, but I walked into the Birmingham Museum of Art and I saw a Sargent painting at the end of the hall, and it's a beautiful painting. And I said, my paintings are nothing like that.
And you thought they might have been.
Oh, I thought I was pretty good, you know. But that kind of woke me up. And my very next painting, nothing was blended, and that was the first painting that I painted that I think was, you know, at the level where that I can say was pretty decent compared to my other work, you know. But then what happened was I was real loose like that, and I got tighter and tighter and tighter because as I got more and more burnout on painting portraits, I just wanted to get paid. And I would tighten up because you'd get less trouble from the client than if you painted it loose. They'd complain more. You know, Sargent's got a great quote. You may have heard it. A portrait is a likeness with a little something funny about the mouth. Have you ever heard about that? Anyway, and so that's what you deal with as a portrait artist, because you couldn't be dealing with something more intimate in somebody than their child or their wife or whoever. And so that, man, if you get the nose just slightly off, they're going to notice it, you know. And I'll tell you a funny story about noses being off. This is an absolutely true story. Probably the second year I was painting, I mean, just starting out and painting my very first portraits, and I did a portrait of a lady's daughter, and I can tell this story now, and I won't tell who it was, but I had done this portrait of her daughter, and she came in and she told me that the nose was off, that there was a bump in the nose and I needed to fix the nose. And so I said, sure, I'll make an adjustment, you know. And then she came back about 3 days later, and I wasn't at home, but my wife let her in. She came with another lady that I knew, and they came in, and she said, oh, he fixed the nose. And she thought that I had fixed it, and I hadn't touched it. And I think what happens is that she saw that little bump on the nose, and she went home and she started thinking about that bump. And she started, you know, and you think about it for enough time, and you think, oh, you know, it's a great painting, but the bump on the nose. And then you walk in, and that thing that's, you know, that molehill that became a mountain.
That whole painting overwhelms any kind of bump on the nose.
Yeah. So anyway, it was that was something. But that was a good lesson, because what it means is that you can't, you know, you can listen to people, but a lot of times, especially when they're real close to somebody, they might have a crooked nose. You know what I mean? And they just, for whatever reason, that's something that they wish were a little different or whatever.
Yeah. One of the best videos that I liked of yours was Painting Ugly.
Oh, yeah?
That really hits home.
Yeah.
Because it tells you don't have to paint every button on that shirt.
Yeah.
But
as long as your values are right, then you can get away with anything. Yeah. There's I've talked about this before, but the most extreme version of that I've ever seen, and I have to find the painting, but you can find this in a lot of things, but the texture actually doesn't matter. You know, like you can take I saw a painting of a marble statue, you know, that had polished marble fabric, you know, flowing on this, and it's sitting in the middle of a park, and the painting's of this big park, and then when you get up, look at it, he's painted it with this chunky, you know, jabby, textured, nothing like smooth marble. See what I mean? But as long as the values are right and the color's right, you see marble, you know? And in other words, you got some texture going on here. Well, that's not the texture of that pot.
No.
You know what I'm saying? And yet, you got to have some texture. You got to have something to look at. Even if it's, you know, even if you paint a smooth wall, you have just a little bit of something in there. Otherwise, you can't grab onto it. You know.
That's why they have the texture.
And by the way, I have my own art supply company right here in Austin, Texas, and we manufacture all of our own products. We have a whole line of paint and brush holders, palettes, color checkers, all sorts of things. So go check that out if you haven't at genevafineart.com.